Actually, my talk would be like a sort of recapitulation of many things that we heard through these 2 days, because we had like so many project presentations, and you will hardly hear something new, but we can go together through this overview. I won't speak much about Infoclio. If you're curious about, like what's going on historical research in Switzerland, you can have a look. The website is mostly of French and German. Anyway, before I start, I just wanted to make 3 short remarks about the historiography of cartography. The first one was mentioned by you this morning, is that since, I would say 30 years, historiography explicitly acknowledges that maps are not neutral tools. On the opposite, maps are tools of domination, and that have been used, in the process of colonialism and imperialism. Through several processes like simplification, essentialization, and objectivization, maps have a strong have a strong power of influencing processes and understanding. So these are 3 books among many who deals directly with this power of maps. So all people dealing with maps on a daily basis for research, etc., should be aware that what they are doing is not neutral, but as the expression says, putting on the map, this is also like a political act, let's say. Another moment of cartography, historiography, interesting moment, very specific, is the invention of psychogeography. Maybe some of them heard of it. This is a production and a map from Guy Debord, which was the founder and leader of a revolutionary movement from the 50s in Paris called the situationism. And as a reaction somehow to this power-related usage of maps, they developed what they call psychogeography. And they dismembered, as you you can see in this image, the map of Paris, trying to do a subjective map of what students in Paris would use as spaces between universities and cafes, etc. And they called that psychogeography, and they thought that would be like a liberation instrument, like to take out cartography out of the hands of people in power and to make it some revolutionary tool. They mentioned that because now with collaborative mapping, these ideas are coming back. And the last moment I want to mention is the moment we are in now. This is the topic of this conference, is like all these new potentials linked with new software available and map-based storytelling that we are investigating together these 2 days, around also GIS, etc. These are 3 books dealing with these topics, published recently, with even big claims, that the humanities have entered a geographical term, that we are inventing something new like the spatial humanities. I won't judge on these claims, but anyway, we are definitely like in some exciting moment around the possibility of digital tools applied to cartography. And talking about digital tools, there is one very important moment in the digital cartography is the launch of Google Maps, but more specifically of the programmation interface of Google Maps that has been released in 2005 and who underpins a very, very large number of digital history or digital projects dealing with maps. Another one who appeared just 1 year later is the API from OpenStreetMaps, OpenLayers. To see how prevalent these two tools are, I made, maybe 3 years ago, a survey of 150 websites dedicated to the centenary of the First World War. And I'm gonna just show you some results related to mapping practices. This is an extract of my sample. Unfortunately, I couldn't include, websites in Cyrillic because I use only like 4 or 5 languages I could more or less understand, but I had nonetheless an international sample. And what I wanted to show you is that the presence of a map in this sample about website about the First World War was quite present. If you cumulate all these numbers, it means that almost a quarter of the website had a map, and from this quarter you see that many of them, the majority of them, used the Google Maps API. I'm going to show you some specific example of this. And also to introduce an idea I wanted to present is that now maps have in many projects a new function, and it's the function of a browsing interface. And we saw a couple of examples among the projects that have been presented during this conference. This is an Italian website about the First World War, and you see 3 browsing interface. The one is the timeline. Another one is the map. Here also, like with the Google API. And the third one, for example, here is like a normal, search mask for a database. Another example from this very prominent project about the International Encyclopedia of the First World War. Here also you see on the home page, they offer 3 ways to enter the contents, the timeline, the map, and the third one, I think it's topics, themes. Here is the map browsing interface. Last project showing basically the same idea is this very beautiful project about the First World War made in Vienna from the Shambhala Museum. Very complete, also with parts on Eastern Europe, etc. Very nice project. Here they have like this custom timeline. You can enter through the source documents that are presented like this, and when you click on a document, then you have like the metadata and the story related to it, and an interactive map where the documents and some stories are placed. What is interesting here is that you have also the time dimension. You can see on the lower bar that you can restrict the time period, and it changes what is displayed on the map. Well, from Switzerland, then I wanted to present you the idea that the same idea that map as a search or browsing interface. This is the National Digital Catalog for maps in Swiss libraries. And what is interesting is that you have search method drawing polygons on a world map, and then you will get the list of the actual maps that are preserved in libraries that correspond to this polygon. So I made a test here on Lemberg, and I found a couple of maps, and I was really happy about it. And that's new. I mean, usually you look like for names, etc. And here you can look through polygons on maps. Another project from Switzerland on the same kind of idea is the National Topographic Agency, responsible of establishing the maps of the country. And what they did is that they overimposed the different historical maps of Switzerland on a dynamic map. And you have also a time slide on the upper side of the window. and you can see, through time how the country is changing. So this is this idea of overlaying maps on dynamic coordinate systems that can change through time. Anyway, another changing topic slightly, wanted to come back on the idea of soundscapes and how to map or relate sound to territories. Because there are a couple of interesting projects going on. Maybe the most famous one from America is this Roaring Twenties project, where they mapped audiovisual documents, but also audio documents here in the old map of New York. And by clicking through this interactive map, you can hear some noises, some video, but also find low cases, because the data, part of the data comes from complaints, from the neighbors saying there's too much noise, and you can find these complaints browsing through this map. From there, I want to switch to another project, which also brings me to another topic, which is the topic of collaborative mapping. This is not really a historical project, this is more like a crowdsourced project. It's called the London Sound Survey. It's an individual project where people can register with different devices any sounds from different neighborhoods of London and send them to this website, and then they're getting mapped into the map of the city. And then you can have like a promenade in this digital map of London listening to the sounds. And I mentioned this project because, as I said earlier, the possibility of collaborative crowdsourcing maps are made really more easy through the software available, and represented an interesting way to rethink mapping practices. Traditional crowdsourcing about cartography is also very popular, and it's an area of crowdsourcing that is functioning very well. The New York Public Library, for example, proposes you to adjust, historical maps on a Google Map or an OpenStreetMap layer, fixing the details, and people are doing that with great pleasure. The British Library made a similar project, and as you can see, hundreds or thousands of maps have been successfully placed or geo-coordinated by the public. Of course, we can question the economy of such projects, because that's free labor, and you can ask if it's the role of public institutions to ask for free labor from their public. But and there is also an interesting story, because if you look into the details of who does this labor, often there are very small numbers of very active participants doing the majority of the work. Many of them are senior retired persons, and there is interesting stories about that, but the fact is that it works. I already mentioned the possibility, yes, to adapt the geographical coordinates of old maps on recent layers. The David Ramsey map collection is one of the most preeminent examples, when you can see thousands of old maps overlaid to a recent Google Maps interface. I must say it's a pleasant way to explore historical maps. A question that has been pervasive through this workshop is, can we build map-based narratives? In a sense that not just you know, statistical mapping, but can we build a narrative that is based on the map as the first entry point? And my first example is not from the humanities, but from the natural science, is this National Geographic website who have put a camera with a GIS on a bear in the Yosemite Park, and they've tracked him, and you can follow, you know, the life of the bear over several weeks, and at certain points you can see like a couple of videos. But it is clear in this example that the path and the map is the red line, and then you have other media that are attached to it. I identified 3 main software packages that exploit this kind of narration. The first one is Neatline, is a product of the University of Virginia, actually. It's free, and it offers you the possibility, you know, as you see here, to design polygons on maps, to attach to these polygons commentaries, as you see in this window that opens, and you can attach to polygons commentaries and images, and you can also have a timeline that changes the map. I must say this software, as well as the 2 others that I will present, are not quite trivial software. I mean, it's feasible to do that on your own without the help of a software developer, but it's some kind of hurdle. The other one who was used and presented many times already in these 2 last days is this Arcgis. Arcgis is a very powerful software package from a private company, but they have like the sub-product for storytelling, which is called story maps. And as you see here in the layer, they have like prefabricated possibilities, as you see there, where you can present a map and then have an image gallery or a slideshow, etc. A little bit how in the similar direction of the project of Luxembourg, but I would say like on a slightly larger scale. And you can design on maps, put icons, etc., and build your own interactive maps. And the third one is also a university project from California, Santa Barbara or UCLA, I'm not sure anymore, called Hypercities, which is also like a software package where you can, it's based on Google Maps or Google Earth, you can overlay historical maps, put pointers on them, and then relate these pointers to other documents, text and stories. And you have also the possibility to include a timeline, as you can see on the above, yes, on the upper left side of the project. So these are 3 software solutions to try to go into this direction of map-based narrative. Another field that has been touched yesterday by you, but which is actually very interesting and booming, is the question of literature and cartography. This is a very recent book, extensively dealing with this topic. And I mentioned that because in Switzerland we have a couple of important projects trying to using cartography on literary texts, or using literature as sources for cartography. One of them is this literary atlas of Europe, based in Zurich. It's an Italian professor called Barbara Piatti who does that. And the particularity here is that there are 2 things. Is that first, how do you extract, data from literary text? What kind of data you want to extract? So the basic solution would be to place name of towns, name of streets, etc. But she does also like more complicated things like sentiment analysis, and then she makes like heat map related to sentiment analysis according to certain places, etc. She works with geographers. That means that she has also beautiful visualizations to show. If you're curious, you can have a look. In a more traditional way, the work of Joyce has been used extensively to map, to do digital mapping projects, because his work, like the Dubliners, that's the problem, but also other works are very, like Ulysses, are very close to the territory. The territory plays an important role in his writing, and so there is different project mapping the places in his novels. This is a project from Australia, but we're using Swiss sources. In Switzerland, during the Enlightenment, we had a couple of very active publishing houses. One of them was located in Neuchâtel. It was called the Société Topographic de Neuchâtel. And this research team took all the selling books and mapped to where were sent the books published in the Société Topographic de Neuchâtel. And here I extracted the subset about Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and you saw where the volumes of Rousseau were sent from Neuchâtel in the late 18th century. And you see that it was already European-wide distribution, but you also can recognize how, like the first acquirer were the people at Versailles from the court, were like huge fan of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, that was already known, but also the court in St. Petersburg who spoke of French. Poland was also like very fond of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. It's an interesting way to visualize the traffic of books. On a very smaller scale, and to present one of the difficulties of mapping history, to say, this is a small project that we did with Infoclio. We provided like a complete digital edition of the works of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And in this complete edition, there were like 600 letters, and we mapped the place from where these letters were written. And I mention this because one of the difficulties we had, like we used the Google Maps API, it was toponymy. I mean, many places don't have the same name in the 18th century than today, and for that Google cannot help you. So you have to do your own historical research to then place correctly to place correctly the geo coordinates. And this is another Swiss project interesting about traveling. The books about travelings in the Alps. You know that visiting the Alps was one of the points that, first of all, English noblemen during the 18th century, but also the 19th century, they were traveling around Europe. Most of them went to Italy to see the ruins, etc. But they passed through Switzerland, and there are all these books about the beautiful natural landscape of Switzerland. It's also a moment where the birth of the myth of Switzerland was born. So it's an interesting cultural phenomena, and they mapped both the picture that were contained in this book, but also like some kind of the narratives in this database. To come back to toponymy. I mean, how do you find the names through time? First of all, I want to compliment the center for the huge work you made about toponymy in Lviv, because that must have been really an erudite work of reconstitution through languages and time, and I think it's very precious for, first of all, to build a computer-enabled application. In Switzerland, we have a similar project for each canton through time, but also at the national level through this project Ortsnamen. Anyway. To finish and to launch the discussion somehow, I wanted to show you two extracts in the direction of reconstitution and 3D modeling. We briefly heard about some of the projects from our colleagues, Beyond, but there are two projects I'd like to show you. One is from Paris, and it's this lady who is using all kinds of sources, including, old paintings, literary sources, images, whatever she can find, to then reconstitute parts of Paris as they were in the 18th century. So I'll play you some part of this. And she's also interested in soundscapes. So also the sound is a tentative historical reconstitution. And it's of course also a little bit polemical, because I'll show you a part of that. And then the last one, it's another video I'll show you directly after it, is the main yet historical mapping project in Switzerland. And it's also the most controversial and discussed, and all historians are going crazy about this project. Is led by the Polytechnical School of Switzerland. It's called Venice Time Machine, and I'll show you a video presentation of it, and then we can discuss together. So, this one is a long one. I'll just pass you an extract when you're into Paris. So she's using a video game graphic motor to reconstitute it. I make a jump to here. She was interested in this part of the time because this bridge doesn't exist anymore nowadays. So that's what. So that's one. And now the Venice Time Machine. That is a small video just to say how prominent this project is. They've got like articles in the New York Times. They have like 4 pages on Nature who made this video before actually releasing any results. That's very interesting. I mean, they will explain the research process, but they didn't manage yet, to have concrete historical results. That's also why historians are so much discussing about it.
In the friary of this church, over 1,000 years of history reside in the friary of this church in Venice. Stacked on over 80 kilometers of shelves are maps, manuscripts, monographs, documents recording generations of Venetian bureaucracy. Most of this vast collection has never been read by modern historians. But a new project aims to uncover the secrets of this enormous archive and digitally reconstruct the Venice it describes. The Venice Time Machine project aims to make the huge amount of data stored in the State Archives of Venice accessible to researchers. Every page of paperwork must be scanned and digitized to enable searching and cross-referencing. Normal character recognition software doesn't work well on the wide variety of handwriting found in the archive. So machine learning is being used to recognize word shapes and match them between documents. Cross-referencing names means researchers can create social networks for the city. And the data contained in maps enables them to recreate the building up and occasional falling down of Venice's buildings. Information in maps can then be cross-referenced with historical paintings as well as modern photos. And combining these images with apparently mundane paperwork about shops and businesses means historians can reconstruct the details of the city at almost any point in its history. This virtual time machine should allow modern historians and members of the public to explore ancient Venice. And the written documents could provide data sets on anything from trade and financial markets to public health and the spread of disease. The technology developed for the Venice Time Machine project could be applied to other ancient archives too, creating detailed and inspiring windows into the past.
So that's it basically, and now they're in the process of trying to present a European project to build like time machines for several European cities, and they are in the review process to ask like for this giga grant from the European Union. Yes. So that's it. Thank you for your attention.
Now you can have a light. Thank you, Enrico. So we are ready to pass the microphone to people who have questions, especially those who work with maps. Oh.
Maybe not questions, but comments. A few years ago, it was also a workshop in this room, and one Ukrainian guy who was director of historical culture reserve of Tustan here in Lviv region presented the 3D model of Tustan castle from early medieval ages. So in Ukraine we have similar scenes, maybe not for big cities or towns like Venice, but it has already done. So you can find it in the internet. It's very nice reconstruction of wooden castle, and it's really a lot of technical work. Maybe not much using historical, but more archaeological data, and then reconstruction with modern, I don't know, laser scanning technique. So it's a very good example. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also have an example and maybe a question, if you know of a similar project. Since yesterday we've been talking how these maps and technologies can convey, for example, soundscapes, but speaking about other senses, have you encountered the projects that also work with, for example, smellscapes or tastescapes? So something that actually a computer cannot still convey, but it can appeal to our imagination. And one of the projects that comes to my mind is conducted nowadays by my colleague from Vienna, Stephanie Weissman, working with interwar literature. She's also developing a map which is called Smellscapes of Lublin, of a Polish city. So I was wondering if you know about something similar, and do you think how far we can go? Like, is it already? So even these sounds which are artificial, it is already some kind of simulacrum. And what about smells and tastes? Can we really put them on in a virtual reality, in virtual maps?
Yeah.
But Enrico will collect a few more.
Okay.
Just make some remarks.
Thank you for your presentation, and I have two questions related to the cases that you mentioned in your presentation. The first one is regarding those 3D models. Can you tell more about this discussion that is going on regarding this controversial one, and what is the main points of such a discussion and debates? Because, for example, in the previous in the 3D model about Paris, we see this reconstruction of the city. We hear voices of people, but we actually don't see any person on this reconstruction. So basically, to what extent it is reconstruction? And this is the first question. The second one is regarding the discussion. Maybe you can elaborate more on the discussion of how technology affects, how digital mapping affects the results of such a visualization, reconstructions, and mapping projects in general, because it definitely shapes somehow in some aspects digital projects. But like, for example, you mentioned Google API and OpenStreetMaps, and basically you have this big problem in our project as well, when we have like geographical coordinates the same, but visualizing this coordinate on Google API and on OSM, OpenStreetMaps, it shows different locations. And basically, the technology itself, the tool that we are having, and we are using. Most of scholars are using either Google API or OpenStreetMaps. It defines the way that we visualize this place on the map, because it's the very tool, the coordinate is the same, but the very tool differs in visualization. So basically, these are the questions.
So one would be a question, another also a comment. So when we have this 3D, 4D, or in future 5 or 6D, it's idea that you have to have like as much immersion as possible, and this actually also gets into the point that you probably is working against as little distance as possible. And if you do have this fairly powerful emotional experience, and think about, how do we get and process our knowledge, especially about past and place. And so for so many times here we have this from completely different area situation. But my grandmother told me this, so this is how it was in the past. And you can't really, it's hard to have a distance to the source, saying that, it takes time to say that what your grandmother told you is not probably exactly the past. And here with these powerful engines of how places looked like, people might get the sense this is exactly as it was, and we cannot really, how can we embed some sense of distance, or saying that this is approximation and this is not what it was. So this is one, and another about, this how many Ds. We actually do have a quite excellent and very interesting example of model, which actually goes back to the 1930s. In this city, there was this model created by a team, a workshop of architect, historian of architecture and art, Witwicki. And that was, he was not alone, there were many examples, for example, the same was in Breslau done, but this one was really extremely interesting because it was thoroughly researched, it was extremely ideological because it was done on the basis of the maps and drawings and whatever materials could be found and later imagined of the sixth city of Lviv from 1772 before, which means pre-Austrian, which meaning like Polish, whatever Polish means. And it also was participatory because to finance it, so state financed it, city financed it, but also there was a lottery and people were buying this lottery and thus crowdfunding this project. It's now is on display in Warsaw. The documents are in Kiev, and the creator is buried somewhere here because he was killed in '46, and this model was basically smuggled through the border because Nikita Khrushchev wanted very much to have it here. So it's basically saying that this is a nice story which probably highlights some of the threats which we can find here, but it's also on technological side. It had the sense of periscope, so the people could watch it on the level of street, so several angle point. But again, back to my first question, how can we embed distance and criticism, or at least, because these things are very attractive and provoke emotions and can cloud relations with the past.
Okay, Enrico, if you remember.
Yeah, I took some notes.
Please.
So about the smellscapes, what can I say is that we are working here on a very thin line between science and entertainment. And on the side of entertainment, now there are movie theaters who offers this smellscape experience, where you have not only the seat which is moving, but also they send like some water and some perfumes to do that.
There is one German research organization that you probably know of, called Stasi, from Secret Service. They were like collecting these smells. There's like in Stasi Museum in Berlin, you have like
Samples.
bottles like with the samples of like smell of the seats where people were sitting, and then they were collecting so dogs can.
But beside of that, I didn't know the example you mentioned. I didn't know any other example. About the controversy over the time machine, there are a couple of points. One point is about automatic recognition of handwriting and machine learning. Some scholars who dedicated their lives to learn the evolution of handwriting through the Middle Ages refuse to believe that an algorithm can do that at their play, and so contest the claim that they will be able to do that. The same at the next level, which is, mapping together names. So you do the handwriting recognition, but then you have to do the semantic extraction. And also there, many scholars doubt really that you can semantically extract knowledge which you can make sense of. Because it's something to recognize a name, but then you need to understand in which context you recognize this name to map it to another occurrence of the same name. Not to mention the fact that names are spelled in different manners at that time, etc. So there are a lot of epistemological problems related. But more generally, a more general critique is also that doing a realistic 3D reconstitution of the past is not doing history. Doing history would imply having a research question that you ground usually in the present, and then you try to answer it from the past perspective. And this is not the direction in which this project is going. So these are the main critics. About
technology in general.
Yeah, exactly. About the Google API, I have two remarks. One that came also about yesterday when internet was not working, is that doing digital history, we increase massively our dependency to technology and to software in general. Let alone if you use proprietary software, little bit less if you use open source software, but in both cases you need current, you need internet, etc. So the dependency to technology is rising. But also another point about Google API I could mention is that the semiology of mapping, how you represent map, remains overall quite traditional. Someone can say. So Martin was suggesting this morning, to let alone administrative district and replace them by pixels. But it goes into the direction that we are still using this Mercator projection that was developed 200 years ago, and that although we have these technological tools, we're still quite conservative in the representation, and this API doesn't really help in that direction. That's my comment. About emotion and how to get distance. I mean, this is a good question, and the conclusion I made from my review of the website of the First World War is that there is a deep tendency to personalize history. You know that more and more the websites will center the narratives around your person. So some websites ask you for your location and will present you that GIS-based stories around you. Other websites will ask you for your names, and from your name they will present you stories related to your family. When you're working with your GPS and so from multiple aspects we're entering an age of more person-centered history. And I agree with you, there is a danger related to that. So on the one side it's more appealing because you feel more directly concerned. On the other side, you lack this critical distance, and so you will have more difficulty to, step back from what your grandmother said, what you are, and actually that's what history is supposed to be. It will help you to get you some critical distance from your inherited subjectivity, a cultural subjectivity. So I agree, and your last remark was really interesting, and probably with the development of 3D reconstitutions, there are new interesting stories to write about, modeling at the beginning of the century, because all our museums have like these city models, and as you mentioned, they are embedded in political histories, and that's a future interesting topic of research.
Okay.
One comment. In 2008, I was in a very gross conference in Moscow. 1,000 people from all continents were there, and one of moment the discussion is Museum of Konstantin Melnikov. It's famous architect in Moscow, and it's very small building in the center of Moscow. Is ground in the Moscow very expensive, and one very young lady, maybe 16 or 17 years, come and said, why we discussion about the conservation of this building. We can digital museum of this building. And that's right. And no problems. It's very important for me, and it's a very big risk for me. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I don't know whether you want to respond to this.
That's an ongoing discussion in Arcgis with also digitization of documents. In Switzerland recently there's been like a polemic because the director of the library of one of the two polytechnical schools openly said, look, I'm going to digitize my collection and then I'm going to get rid of the books because I don't need them. But okay, he's the director of a polytechnical school where anyway, 95% of his budget for acquiring content is digital now. But anyway, it relaunched these polemics. But the guy was isolated among his own professional community, and I think there is well-spread understanding among historians, archivists, and librarians that you cannot replace an original by a digital copy. As we said yesterday night at the dinner, first of all, because usually the digital copy has a lifespan which is so much shorter than the original, even if the original is in some strange, inflammable material. Often it will last maybe 10 times longer as a digital file. Yeah.
I wanted to bring two more things. One more answer to the question about this 2-3 project that I know also very well, and a question, a historiographical question for you. So the first is, about this Venice time machine or the Paris project. I would say the biggest concern historians have, well, especially the guys from Lausanne and the Venice time machine are really good friends and colleagues. So I'm not saying that to say that they're not working well on that, but they are working with an extremely positivist perception of what an archive is and what it can tell from the past. When you are an historian, you know that the archive is a construction. It's something that shows it's not a gate to another reality or to the reality of the past, but is a trace of an activity and not something that is making yourself able to reconstruct something from the past. So there are many issues with the fact that, of course, you will extrapolate lots of things from that. This is a question we always have when we interpret the archives. But taking them as something that will make you able to say that, okay, this register of the shops in Venice makes me able to reconstruct what was in the street is completely ignoring what the register is, in fact. That register is not a data source. It's something much more complicated, in fact. There are many logics behind that you ignore or you have to criticize. So that's a very important point in the discussion on that subject, and that's very hard to make people from computer science and modelization understand this question. They really that's different words, and that's what digital humanities is about, to make people discuss that, and that's cool. That will come. And that's why I'm not completely critical about their project. Maybe they will hire historians to work with them, but for the moment, that's not really. They are more about producing videos for nature. So that's fine. Maybe you also have to have time to get money for your project and then to run it properly. I don't know. We have to be pragmatic in the academy, I would say also. And I have a question for you, Enrico, about a sentence you said. You said it is being incredibly easier to make maps, or the digital tools are allowing us today to produce these maps and this. Not speaking only about 3D models, but all the other maps you have seen, and this is. I wanted to ask you your perception about all the practices you have seen. Do you think that they are here because it was possible, or they are here because people wanted to do that? Well, because in many projects, sometimes we see a very nice, colorful map, and we are just in front of something that has been produced because it was possible to produce that, and not because it was useful or interesting for the analysis or useful for the public and so on. With all the websites you have seen, what is the proportion of those who are like things that are made nice to be nice, or made because the PhD student of the project, he discovered this new tool and he wanted to use that? Or is it because we also know that all these maps with flows, colors, and so on, they are already 2 centuries old. We were already producing that before digital tools. People who wanted to draw something innovative, they were able to draw something innovative. So that's not really just about the disponibility of the tool today, but the easy access. I don't know if you have
What I've seen through this research on the First World War is that, yes, I think through the Google API, many projects include a map that wouldn't be included if they hadn't access to such tools. And more generally, I see like 2 big families of projects, but maybe this is not a good reflection. One that are like anchored in mapping practices, and some example that the people doing like statistics, mapping statistics, etc., who are deeply involved with methodology, and other who had another focus on the research, and those other groups would use map only as an illustration, and if they can produce them, I would say like without too much hurdle or complication. So probably there are tendentially, at least on public history projects, much more maps than they used to be. And also, what I mentioned is that now if you're doing a website, a history website, you tendentially want to offer, you know, a map interface. And we saw that this is very present, and it's something very cool to have. Although it may not be totally indispensable for the point you are making. That's my impression.